I'd like to invite Ed Maloney to the podium, please.
Sadly, Boston College's behaviour since the subpoenas were served has been nothing short of disgraceful.
Irish author and journalist Ed Maloney is explaining his bitter anger to academics in Belfast. He is project manager of the secret paramilitary archives held 3,000 miles away at Boston College. A detailed and potentially incriminating litany of crimes, like this recording of former IRA commander Brendan Hughes, now dead.
We're robbing banks, robbing post offices, robbing trains, planting bombs, shooting Brits, trying to stay alive yourself, trying to stay from getting arrested.
Maloney accuses the college of failing to fully challenge subpoenas issued by the United States Attorney General, demanding they hand over some of the trove to Northern Ireland's police.
Here is Boston College, a huge institution, wealthy institution, could easily afford to continue this fight, should continue the fight, because if this case is lost, it has terrible, terrible implications for the whole tradition of oral history, which is a very rich tradition.
Maloney, an award-winning documentary filmmaker, has written cutting-edge books on the IRA and Irish politics, and is now appealing the subpoenas with researcher Anthony McIntyre in a last-ditch bid to protect the former IRA members they interviewed.
Boston College have violated every guarantee of confidentiality by even giving them to the district court judge.
If the tapes are handed over to Northern Irish police, Maloney says it won't just be Anthony McIntyre potentially at risk, but any IRA member McIntyre interviewed.
It is a crime in their eyes, in the leadership of the IRA's eyes, punishable by death, to betray secrets to anyone outside of the organization, which they were doing. And these subpoenas have put the interviewees in danger for that reason.
Northern Ireland's police are using an Anglo-American treaty to get tapes relating to Jean McConville's death. Maloney and McIntyre are appealing a US federal judge's ruling that 7 of 26 IRA interview tapes be handed over.
The blame lies exclusively with Ed Maloney for foregoing his obligation, and to try to assign blame to Boston College is absurd.
The obligation to the interviewees broken, the college says, when Maloney quoted from the archive.
It all went wrong, regrettably, when a book was published in Ireland in 2010 by Ed Maloney called Voices from the Graves, that brought attention to an archive that had otherwise been at Boston College for 5 years without any recognition, quite frankly.
The book features excerpts from interviews of 2 enemies, former IRA member Brendan Hughes and former Loyalist fighter turned politician David Irvine. By agreement, their words made public after their death. Boston College staff were heavily involved in the publication of the book, got a credit in the book, even pushed Maloney and his researchers to publish sooner.
At one stage, we were approached, myself here in the United States and the interviewers in Belfast, by Boston College to ask if we could persuade the interviewees to soften the terms of their contracts with Boston College to allow material to be published while they were still alive.
But the allegations and arguments don't stop there. The university accuses Maloney of underplaying the risks to interviewees.
From the beginning, we said to the project organizer who approached us with this idea that there were limitations regarding the assurances of confidentiality under American law. Specifically, he was told that these assurances of confidentiality would not withstand a subpoena.
The line that they point to is contrary to the extent of American law.
Yes, but what is that referring to? Is that referring to confidentiality, or is it referring to copyright? Is it referring to ownership or whatever?
It's ambiguous.
It's ambiguous, and it's certainly not clear, and that's our point, but that's not the end of the story.
Yeah. At issue, details in the research contracts. Only Maloney's contract cites limitations of American law, a potential threat to keeping the interviews confidential.
So according to the reading of these, Agreement A means this.
So there's no to the extent of American law in this agreement?
No.
Brendan Hughes and all the other interviewees' contracts do not, according to Maloney and McIntyre. And they say that all was signed and approved by a Boston College archivist. And at no time during the years that these were going into Boston College did they turn around and say, oh, stop, go back, you must point this issue out?
Never once.
Ultimately, the whole archive, not just the IRA tapes relating to Jean McConville's death, but any interviews by IRA or Loyalist fighters could be at risk.
If UK law enforcement seeks a subpoena through the US Attorney's Office regarding criminal investigations, in light of the precedent that this case has set, yes, Boston College could be liable to turn over additional materials.
I feel very, very badly let down by the Boston College authorities, who have been disingenuous, dishonest, and absolutely caved in when they should have stood by their guarantees, and they should have, in all circumstances, worked to protect research participants, researchers, and the archive itself.
Across the Atlantic in Belfast, these recriminations are an irrelevance. Police investigations have begun, triggered, they say, by Ed Maloney's book. Police decline interviews, but in a short press release outline the following. Police say they'll follow the material in the Boston archives all the way to court if that's where it takes them. They say detectives have a legal responsibility to investigate murders and follow all lines of inquiry for the victims, for their next of kin, and for justice. Do you think in your heart that these tapes will be handed over here?
I'm hoping that there will be, yeah. I'm hoping. That's all I can do is hope.
Helen McKendry believes the tapes contain incriminating clues that could point to her mother's murderers. Have you asked the police to pursue the tapes?
Yes, we have, of course, yes.
After almost a lifetime of disappointment, the McKendrys are beginning to believe truth and justice may be within reach.
We didn't really care for the foot soldiers that were tasked with killing her mother, perhaps, disposed of her body. It was the generals that told them to do it. And those generals are masquerading as politicians in suits and ties. And yes, of course, it's only natural we'd wish to bring them down. Yeah.
But that, bringing down those responsible, may be a stretch. There is in Northern Ireland an unease. Communities clinging to faith, holding on to their histories. Ever present the belief that the other side of the religious-political divide is getting a better deal. On the contentious issue of unsolved murders, that unease is acute. One murder in particular, that of Catholic lawyer Pat Finucane, killed by Protestant gunmen in 1989, is a case in point. Finucane was killed by Loyalist paramilitaries, shot 14 times in front of his family. He'd risen to prominence in the courts, defending the IRA and Loyalist paramilitaries. A British government report stated that his killers acted in collusion with the police. And not just the Northern Irish police, but the British Army too, all responsible to the British government. The British Prime Minister, Tony Blair, who oversaw the Good Friday peace agreement, promised Finucane's family an inquiry. But late last year, when his wife went to visit David Cameron, Britain's current Prime Minister, the British government's message had changed. No public inquiry that could perhaps uncover new evidence.
If they don't
give an inquiry into my husband's murder, which was promised, it will just increase the suspicions. And there are many dissident Republicans who are saying, same old Brits, nothing has changed, we still need to fight against the British government. And it is giving ammunition to people to return to violence.
Across the Atlantic, in Washington, D.C.'s polite political circles, Finucane is a welcome guest, speaking at a committee that tracks investigations into her husband's murder. She thinks British security services, including the intelligence service MI5, who are still very active in Northern Ireland, are blocking Cameron.
At one particular point, he seemed to get particularly frustrated, and he just threw up his hands and waved them about and said, you know, there are people here in Whitehall who will not let me give you an inquiry.
What the Prime Minister offered was less. No public inquiry, but a closed-door, limited review of previous investigations.
We spent some time looking at every possible option, and the Prime Minister took a personal interest in this case, and we concluded that actually the best route was to let loose an internationally renowned lawyer on a huge archive of government and police material, and that is exactly what we've done.
For Maloney, the Finucane case is particularly troubling. He says the British government and Northern Ireland's police, the PSNI, appear to want to expose past paramilitary wrongdoing, like Jean McConville's murder, but not examine their own.
While the PSNI is demanding the right to rummage through the archives of Boston College, David Cameron is refusing the Finucane family the right to rummage through MI5's archives to find out what happened in their case. That's double standards.
Apparent double standards that are opening a Pandora's box of speculation.
I find it just imponderable why the police are going down this road when they must know that there is no chance of obtaining any convictions at the end of this.
Richard O'Rourke was in the IRA for decades, giving his interview to McIntyre for Boston College 10 years ago. For him, it was a life-changing experience.
I remember breaking down, actually breaking down and uncontrollably had to stop the interview.
Crying?
Crying, yeah. And that was the catalyst. I was never the same after that. And that was the thing about Boston for me. It was a catalyst.
A catalyst to tell his story. He has no blood on his hands, never killed anyone, he says. But even so, since the subpoenas in Boston, he's been watching his back.
And I've spoken to leading lawyers, particularly from my own point of view, and asked them how credible would these tapes be in evidential terms. And they were absolutely adamant that there'd be no evidential value in them whatsoever.
A sentiment echoed on the other side of the sectarian divide.
I mean, there's no golden treasure there at gold mine where people are going to get mass prosecutions. So it's giving people false hope. It's delaying any truth recovery process.
William Plum Smith is a former Loyalist prisoner. He gave interviews to the Boston College archive in the hope of educating future generations. His community bore a large share of the sectarian violence, the IRA blowing up pubs, shops, killing and maiming. And from the same streets, young Loyalist gunmen and bombers set out to cause equal or worse carnage on the Catholic community. Among former Loyalist fighters here, there is little trust in the police, whom Loyalists suspect are out to get them, and next to no hope of adding to the archive of tapes in Boston.
Can't expect people to talk if, on one hand, and be open and honest, candid as much as they can be, and then have the police knock their door and say, right, you said this or you said that.
Cutting short the project, a huge loss for future generations.
This would be a very valuable historical archive, a very useful tool for future students of conflicts, also for policymakers, because what we were providing here, I think in a very realistic way, was a glimpse into the mind of the terrorist.
Only a tiny handful of people know what's on all the tapes. Brendan Hughes here confesses to one of the IRA's biggest atrocities. Bloody Friday.
I was responsible for a fair deal of the bombs coming into the town. It wasn't directly my decision to do this, but I was the person that organised it.
In the space of 80 minutes, 22 IRA bombs went off here in the streets in the centre of Belfast. It was just after 2 in the afternoon, the 21st of July, 1972. 9 people were killed, 130 wounded, 77 of them women and children.
It was a major, major operation, but it was never, ever intended to kill people. I mean, if I could reverse the situation, I would. I have a fair deal of regret.
It is a tiny tip of an iceberg of information that McIntyre and Maloney fear could trigger police demands for all the tapes in the Boston archive to expand investigations beyond Jean McConville's murder. And there are plenty of people who want that to happen.
So that people know that the incidents haven't been forgotten, that they are being probed, that they are being scrutinised.
The looming mystery of who was responsible for Jean McConville's murder. Will they ever face justice? Yet to be solved.